Singing, I was just reminded how much scripture is in what we sing. I was interviewing Kate Grant this week on our podcast, Listening and Responding, and just digging into 40 days of, 40 days reading the scriptures. We're past 40 days now, and so I was interviewing Kate. This is her first time reading through the scriptures chronologically, and we're towards the end of Exodus, reading for those of you who are following the Bible recap reading plan. And it was interesting because one of the comments Kate had said is that as she's reading through, she's starting to recognize how much scripture is in the songs that we sing. We're singing the very word of God, and what that does, when we repeat that, is it goes deep inside of us. And it reminds us, because when it's to music, those things come at sometimes difficult times when we hear the melody, and then we start to remember the words, and then we start to remember the promises of who God says he is, which is beautiful. And so a couple of times in the songs, we were singing Psalm 23. I don't know if you recognize that this morning. A couple of times we were singing words from Psalm 23. So this morning, I'm excited because we're going into the valley. We're going into the valley. We are in verse 4 in Psalm 23, and we've hit the halfway point in the psalm. And we're taking our time to really look at this passage because so many of us have heard it routinely in our lives in a variety of ways. It's often read at funerals, especially this passage, this part we're heading into. But there's so much more here for us to glean from that really apply to our lives, and especially to what our lives are like today. So the verse is, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." And there was a point in worship this morning where Heather went away from the regular words from the song, and we sang, "I will not fear, for you are with me. I will not fear, for you are with me." That's why we don't fear, not because we have figured out how not to fear. It's because he is with us. And so in verse 4, the psalm actually takes a shift in its narrative. And so the first 3 verses of Psalm 23 are about the shepherd and what he does for the sheep. And it's like the sheep is boasting about the amazing care he's getting from the shepherd, because he says, "I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in these amazing green pastures. He leads me beside the beautiful still waters. He restores me. He leads me on paths of righteousness." David is saying, as he writes this, I have such a wonderful shepherd. And remember, we've talked about this. He's describing for us the place that God is creating in us to dwell. When we choose to follow Jesus, he comes and immediately he goes to work on our hearts to make a dwelling, an abode, and a sanctuary, a home for us. God dwelling in us. We are dwelling together with him. This has always been God's desire. It's been so much greater than even our desire. And there's really something really important about this. He so desires to be with us. He longs even more than you realize just to be with you. He wants to be with you. And that just, when I think about, he desires it more than we can even grasp or understand. It just makes me love him more. He so wants to be with you, know you, and be known by you. So David is boasting about how amazing this place is, where the shepherd, where the Lord is. He says, David says, as the sheep, I'm in need. And that is what trusting and following the Lord looks like. When I read these lines in the first 3 verses, every single time, my body starts to shift. The tension starts to kind of fade away. The pressure starts to roll off. And inside me, something rises up, and it says, fill me with more of you. Do more work in there. I hunger and I long and I thirst for this place that is described in Psalm 23. So God, please do this work in me. Revive me, refresh me, Cleanse me. Do only what you can do. I want this to be what my heart looks like. Come. Please come. And then there's this other part of me that wants to get it done now. I'm impatient. Okay, God, let's get her done. Let's tear up the soil. Let's pull out the weeds. Let's chop down the things that are overgrown. Let's plant the new grass, the new flowers, the trees. Let's just do it now. And I can see the Lord smiling, taking my hand and saying, let's just start with the next step. I've got so much to show you. We don't want to rush the process. We don't want to rush through what I want to reveal to you, what I want to show you. He has things to show you that are special and specific for you and your journey, and he doesn't want to rush past that. He wants you to know that. And so when it comes to soul work, our internal work, as I shared last week, it's slow work. And there are things in us that get in the way. Our own pride, our ego, jealousy. Well, how come they're further along? Why can't I be like them? The selfishness and our own self-focus. We become afraid. We're timid at times. There can be pain that gets in the way. Uncertainty, a lack of trust, desiring that quick fix. I just want it now. Sometimes we get stuck. There can be a lack of willingness. And there's deep-seated belief systems from our families of origin that we get stuck in. We can get stuck in unforgiveness. Fill in the blank. There are layers of things that the Lord is working through in the gardens of our souls. So God is at work, and he's restoring us as we choose to follow him. And we talked about this last week. We cannot do this. We are a sheep, and we need a shepherd. We need help, like this little sheep. We need help. And I love the scripture from Lamentations that reminds us that every morning, every day, every single day, God's mercies are renewed. Every morning. The verse says, this is from the Message version, just to kind of hear it in some different language. God's loyal love couldn't have run out. His merciful love couldn't have dried up. They're created new every morning. How great is your faithfulness? I'm sticking with God. I say it over and over. He is all I've got left. I'm sticking with him. He is all I've got. And this is reminiscent of Psalm 23, verse 3. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He is all I've got. So David says, I have received excellent care from the shepherd on the home ranch throughout the winter and the spring. We actually sang about this today, moving from winter into spring. On the ranch, now we get to move. We're going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. There's a shift, a change. Can you see it? David turns to address the shepherd directly. He says no longer, he's not talking about him. The personal pronouns, I and you, enter the conversation. It becomes a most intimate conversation of deep affection as one who knows the shepherd and is known by the shepherd. For what is about to happen, this shift that we see here is very natural. It's very normal. You see, the sheep-shepherd experience every spring, the sheep are being led up into the hill country. The mountain meadows where their summers will be spent in close companionship and in the solitary care of the Good Shepherd. So they're led away from the home ranch to be with the shepherd all on their own. So summer ranges are common. They're common for cattle ranchers as well. So I recall year after year as my dad's cattle herd grew, he'd actually be on the lookout for pasture land to rent beyond his own land, seeking to find good nourishment for the herd in the summer months. But the difference is that he wouldn't live with the cows. They would get checked upon frequently. But for sheep, this is a common practice in Palestine where David would have been. and on our western sheep ranches. This division of the year is what good shepherds do. They take the flocks into the distant ranges during the summer. Now, this involves long drives, not in a car. They go by foot, and the sheep move along slowly, feeding as they go, gradually working their way up the mountains behind the receding snow. And by late summer, they are well up on the remote alpine meadows above the timberline. Doesn't that sound lovely? Just to be up high in the beautiful mountains. And when the season shifts, which it will, it turns into autumn, early snow begins to settle on those higher ridges and relentlessly forcing the flock to go down to lower elevations. Finally, towards the end of the year, as fall passes, the sheep are driven home to the ranch home where they'll spend the winter. So the grasses on the home range at that point have been replenished because the sheep have been away all summer. So the grasses have been replenished. And so there's food on the home ranch for the sheep. And then in some cases, they may eat dried grass, which is hay in the winter season. Now, Philip Keller, who we've been following in terms of learning from a shepherd, states that this returning to the home ranch lands of the yearly operations in the high country is described in the last half of Psalm 23. So again, as I shared earlier, when we read this psalm, we often get very stuck on the words because that's very natural, we're reading it. But when we think about the much bigger context of what David knew, what he was speaking of, what he was referring to when it came to sheep, there is so much more for us to glean from this passage. And so as I'm describing the movement of the sheep, we're going to talk a little bit more. I want you to think about your own hearts. I want you to think about your own journeys in your own lives. Where are you in the journey? Are you making your way up to the higher places? Are you making your way back down? Are you at the home ranch? Where are you in your journey with the shepherd? So as the sheep are moved to the high country, they are entirely alone with the shepherd. They are in intimate contact with him under his most personal attention day and night, which is why these final verses are given such intimate first-person language. And at the same time, we must remember that this is all done against the dramatic background of wild mountains, rushing rivers, alpine meadows, and high rangelands, often referred to as tablelands, lush with green vegetation. And as Heather shared earlier in worship, when we talk about the evidence of God being with us, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be hard things that we will face. And so this backdrop for the sheep as they go with the shepherd up into the mountainside, it's not going to be easy. And David knew this. He knew firsthand all the difficulties and dangers as well as the delights of the high country. And many times he had gone up into those summer ranges with his sheep. He knew this wild and wonderful country. It was home to him, and he never took his flock where he had not already gone before. Always, he had gone ahead to look the country over with care. Always, he goes ahead. And Philip Keller, our trusty shepherd, shares that all of the dangers of rampaging rivers in flood, avalanches, rock slides, poisonous plants, the ravages of predators that raid the flock, or the awesome storms of sleet and hail and snow were familiar to the shepherd. He handled his sheep and he managed them with care under all of these adverse conditions. He knows the dangers that we face. He knows how fragile we are. And it's interesting, Philip Keller also talks about how when the storms come of snow, like sheep are really thin-skinned, kind of like us. And they're really prone to colds, pneumonia, and other like those kinds of related like respiratory issues. And I was like, oh, that sounds like humans. So they cannot be left to the elements without care. Now, nothing took David by surprise, or the shepherd by surprise. He is fully prepared to safeguard his flock and to tend to them with skill under every circumstance. He knows exactly what the sheep need. Now, who does this sound like? Sounds like Jesus, right? Jesus experienced everything that we did, it says in Hebrews, He was tempted in every way that we are, and he remained without sin. He made his way through all that we face. And in Job 2, we're reminded that nothing happens to us that is not passed through the hand of God. He is sovereign and his will is absolute. And in John 14, Jesus tells his disciples, if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and I'll take you with me, that you may also be where I am. Just like the shepherd, he goes ahead, prepares a place, and brings the sheep with him. So David says with quiet assurance, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. In the wild backdrop of the crazy mountainous terrain, David says, I will not fear. Because you're with me in every situation, every dark trial, and every dismal disappointment, and every distressing dilemma is the shepherd who is leading me to higher ground. But first, we must go through the valley. But why? But why, Lord? Why do we have to go through the valley? What is so important about this valley? It's interesting, at the very beginning, when I read it, in the New King James Version, it says, yea, though I walk through the valley. That's not like, yay. It's even though I walk through, I fear no evil, for you are with me. What we are hearing is that this is going to happen. It's normal. It's very natural to go through the valley. And because he is with me, I don't need to be afraid. But that's the only thing that keeps me from fear is his presence. So often in our Christian life, we talk about the mountaintop experiences, right? These experiences with God. We want to go to these higher places. We want to live above the lowlands of life, move beyond the common crowd, and enter a more intimate walk with God. We want to go to those places with him. We want to be with him. Often, though, we misunderstand how this actually takes place. And I've been guilty of this myself. Imagining that I could be airlifted onto higher ground, bypassing the valley. I don't want to go down there. I just want to go straight up that way. I'm sure there must be some sort of like little prop plane that can just take me across the valley. I can see it on the other side right now, and I'm sure there's some way God can just zoom me across the valley. I can't say that I've ever seen that happen, but I have sure wished and hoped and prayed that this could be the case. On the rough trail, the path of the Christian life, this is not so. Jesus walked everywhere. He began his ministry at 30 years of age. No one is in a rush here. Like sheep tending, like farming and gardening, there are things that must happen for growth and maturity, and they take time. And that is how God designed them. Now, I do believe that God can move us however he pleases, but that is up to him. And unless he does something supernaturally, I'm walking. At times, I'm tripping, falling down, having to get helped back up. And in reality, we're all walking. So in order to get to the lush green pastures on the sides and the tops of the great hills and mountains, the sheep must travel through the valley. This is no different for us who follow Jesus. We only gain higher ground by climbing up through the valley. So yes, we have to move, and there is work to be done. This doesn't happen by wishful thinking. Flashy, quick promises that seem too good to be true are just that. They're too good to be true. The reality is that things as they appear are not always as they seem. And I love the quote from The Lord of the Rings. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, and deep roots are not reached by the frost. We have to look beyond what we see in the natural. And then Robert Frost, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. Not everything is as it seems, and recognizing that means you need someone to guide you. You're going to follow someone who will you listen to? Whose voice will you listen to? Who are you going to trust? There's so many voices pulling at us from our own mind, right? From our peers around us, from our enemy, the devil, and from culture. And then we have our good shepherd, the Lord. We have these voices. There's at least 4 of them that pull us and pull at us. Will you keep your eyes on Jesus? Will you follow his voice above the clamor of the other voices? He's the only one who knows how to get you to those high places, who has gone before you and who knows what the best way is to those tablelands, the high places where the lush grasses grow. He knows the way is always through the valley. We have to go low before we go up. That is a biblical principle. It's throughout the Bible, and we see it with Jesus. God comes low. He comes to us through the life of the God-man Jesus, the incarnation, the divine uniting with flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. He has come down to show us the way. He walked the valley. He prepared the way so we could experience life. Though death looms in the valleys, it's but a shadow. And the presence of the shepherd who knows the way casts light and calls with his voice. So we don't have to fear what may come. It doesn't mean we won't face difficulties, right, in the valley, but we have the care of the one who knows the terrain like no other. So any good shepherd will lead his flock gently but persistently up the paths that wind through the dark valleys. You will face dark valleys. They serve a purpose, and they're necessary to get you to where you're being led. And it's during this time that the shepherd is the nearest. That's something that's really important to remember with the valleys. It is the time when he is the nearest. But often in our own flesh, he doesn't feel very near. But he tells us, I am near. It's important to notice that this verse states, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It does not say I die here, stop here, but rather I walk through. The valley doesn't define you, but it's necessary. It's a necessary part of your journey, and we are being led through. There is no way around. So a number of years ago, I was facing a very dark valley. I was struggling. My health was a mess. My marriage was in a very difficult place. And I would use the words brokenness, stress, and a lot of pain. And I did not want to face the darkness and the shadows that were being cast by the light of the shepherd who was drawing so close and inviting me into the valley. I did not want to go there. I resisted with everything I possibly could. And I found myself at a really large Christian conference in Edmonton that always happens in the dead of the cold of winter in February. So there's thousands of people that come to Edmonton in the dead of the cold. And so we were there at a conference seeking to deepen our walk with Jesus, worshiping the Lord together. And one evening session during worship, with my hands raised, I saw in my mind's eye that my hands were holding 2 glass bulbs, right in the palms of my hands, like Christmas bulbs. And in my fear and angst of having to face my reality, I was resisting. The Lord was showing me my resistance. I didn't want to face the valley in front of me, and I kept saying, God, there's got to be a way around. I actually saw in my mind, like the picture of a mountain, and like, God, I want to go this way. I want to go around the mountain. In the sense, take this from me. And in my resistance to follow the Lord through the looming darkness of going through the mountain, I was actually squeezing these glass bulbs in my hand because of the tension and the stress and the resistance I was feeling. And the more I resisted, the more the stress and the anxiety increased in my body until I squeezed those glass balls so tight that, what do you think happened? They just shattered in my hands. And the glass cut my hands, and I was bleeding everywhere. Not literally, but in my mind's eye. And I knew in that moment that my fear and resistance to go through was actually only hurting me and causing more pain. And in that moment, Jesus, the shepherd, drew so close. And I saw him wipe my hands with a nice, gentle cloth, remove the blood, remove the glass. And then he bandaged my hands, and he assured me that he would walk with me through the valley, that he would be so close. And he lovingly invited me to let go, and just take the next step. I'm going to be with you. We're going to do this together. And at that moment, I said, okay, I will go. I will walk this dark valley, and I will trust that you're going to help me through. And his presence and his reassurance was just enough in that moment to get me started, step one, into the valley. But I can say that along the way, he provided just the right people and experiences at just the right time to help me keep going. Because as we follow him into the hard things, into the dark places, he promises very clearly he is right there. He is going nowhere. And so he will provide for you in the valley. And there is provision in the valley. We're going to talk about that. Because that's why, another reason why the shepherd leads his sheep through the valley first, because there's provision there. And there were times, of course, there's rest and reprieve in the valley. But what really happens in the valley is your trust and your faith begin to grow, because you recognize his presence in the valley with you. The evidence becomes clear as you walk through the pain and the darkness and the suffering. And you learn that he's good, and you learn that there's purpose. Nothing is wasted in our suffering. There's purpose, and it's not something to be afraid of. And if I didn't experience that pain, that dark shadow, I would have never experienced his great comfort. That is one of our realities on this earth that we won't experience in heaven because we won't have pain. But here, in our pain and our suffering, his comfort comes at that point. But if we don't have those experiences of pain and bring those to him, then we're not going to experience his comfort. And his close watch over us. And as I came out of that valley, I picture the Shulamite bride in Song of Solomon 8, where it says, "Who is this coming out of the wilderness, leaning on her beloved?" I came out knowing that now I need to walk with the lean, because I need him. I knew he was with me, and I wanted his loving guidance, and I wanted nothing else. I wanted him, and I knew that he would help me in the future navigate the next valley. And there have been more valleys since. And each time, I can tell you, my resistance is not like, ooh. Each time it gets a little easier to walk, because I know now just how close the shepherd is. And that the purpose of the valley, though full of dark shadows, is nothing to fear. And it's leading somewhere good. And each time, my trust grows deeper and deeper and deeper, because I know he's with me. And I have to say here at this moment, I just want to pause. As we receive the shepherd's care, and as we let him into those places of pain and of hardship and of struggle, and as we see how he does things in us, how he resolves things, how he restores, how he refreshes, how he cleanses us, how we see his care, then we know what we're learning how to care for ourselves. We're learning how to take care of us and love what he loves so deeply and dearly. And as we're learning that, then we're also learning how to love and care for others better. But we're learning it from him because of how he treats us. Then we begin to look at ourselves and those around us out of a place of care and love, just like he has done for us. And that has been a huge part of my journey. He's taught me his love through the trials and hardship of me choosing to trust him. And one day, I will pass through the dark valley of death. And as a child of God, knowing now that the shepherd is really going to be there, he's really going to go with me. There is nothing to fear. It's not an end, but a way through to so much more with Jesus that life is leading us into. As a child of God, death is not the end. We don't have to fear death. And David Guzik shares, this line is especially suggestive when we read this psalm with an eye towards Jesus, the great shepherd. We understand that a shadow is not tangible, but is cast by something that is. So you can't grab a shadow, right? You can't take it. And for that shadow to exist, there has to be light, which is a reminder of just how present Jesus is. You can't have shadows without light. So David goes on to say, one can rightly say that we face only the shadow of death because Jesus took the full reality of death in our place. Isn't that a good word? Jesus defeated death. It is merely a shadow for those who follow him. It has no power, and like the psalmist David says, I do not fear any evil, for you are with me. Now, Charles Spurgeon says this. He says, death in its substance has been removed, and only the shadow of it remains. Nobody is afraid of a shadow, for a shadow cannot stop a man's pathway even for a moment. The shadow of a dog cannot bite, the shadow of a sword cannot kill, and the shadow of death cannot destroy us. And this is true about shadows. But when I read that, I was like, we live in a bit of a different time than Charles Spurgeon. And my experience is that many of us are afraid of the shadows. What is also true about shadows is that they can make things look bigger than they really are. When you cast a shadow of a spider on a wall that was tiny, it suddenly looks very large and frightening, causing us to cower in fear, rather than recognize that it's a shadow. And we have these fantastic imaginations, and we often are beat up by what appears to be real, but it's only a shadow. It's a lie. It's a counterfeit, and even a deception. And so we may be tempted to give up on the valley because we see it looks so big, so difficult, even impossible. And those around us are saying, look at how big and difficult and scary that is. Run away, just give up. There's no use. Why try? Why hope? Just lay down and die. We hear that in our world today. Just give up. That is not what has happened. That was actually what was happening to me as I was facing that valley. People were actually telling me to give up on certain things. Again, the voices of peers. Give up, just give up. The valley of the shadow of death, of suffering, can appear daunting, frightening, and something to stay away from. But David says to us, no, it's not what you think. And your mind is trying to get you to believe what others might say, or what the devil is putting in front of you to convince you to believe otherwise. It's in the valley that the Lord, the Good Shepherd, is the closest. He is intimately present, showing you the way if you trust his voice, his leading, and follow him. Valleys suggest that we are being hedged in and surrounded. We were singing about that today. How do I fight my battles? Right? On our knees, surrounded. We are surrounded by him. In parts of the valley, we may not be able to see very far ahead. Our need for great leadership through the valley is key. It's in the valley that we get to experience more of the goodness of the shepherd. This is where we are learning to trust and learning to follow. Like my story, most of us do not want valleys in our lives. We shrink from them with a sense of fear and foreboding. And as we explore the work of the shepherd, though, with the sheep, we learn otherwise. Here's a couple more reasons why the valley is so important. So not only is the valley the way of the gentlest grades for easier climbing, but it's also the most well-watered route. Here you'll find refreshing water all along the way. There are rivers, there are streams, there are springs, there are quiet pools cut through the crevices of the valley. And in the heat of the summer months, these long drives are hot and tiresome. The flocks experience intense thirst. How glad they are for these wonderful watering spots. So in other words, this is exhausting. Going through the valley is exhausting. If sheep could talk, they'd be saying, "Are we there yet? Can we go another way? We don't want to go this way. We want to go another way." When one walks with God through an intense difficulty and keeps going despite all that is screaming in them to give up and turn around and play it safe, it's here that real and actual refreshment is available. When we've experienced the intimate care of the shepherd in those hard places, in the shadows and darkness, in the wilderness of the valley, we are marked and we are changed. And a deep well forms in us and holds water like a ditch or a channel or a valley. And that reservoir has been carved and cut into our lives by excruciating experiences. The one who can best minister to a broken heart is one who has known a broken heart. Whatever difficulty you have been through gives you a deep place to minister to others. And like Jesus, we become wounded healers. Our wounds, our suffering, are for a purpose, and they're to help us walk and encourage one another along the journey. Another reason to go through the valley is that it is generally where the richest feed and best forage is to be found along the route. The flock is moved along gently. They are not hurried. This is another reminder. They are not hurried. God is never in a rush. In your journey through the valley, there are times when you just want to get through, but he has something more to show you, something more for you to learn. He's never in a rush. The lambs have never been this way before. The shepherd wants to be sure that they will not only be watered, but also have the best grazing available for their moms, for the moms and for the lambs. Generally, the choicest meadows are in the valleys, along the streams of water. Here, sheep feed as they move up towards the high country. Naturally, these grassy grades are often on the floor of the steep-walled canyons and gulches, and there may be towering cliffs above them on either side, and the valley floor itself may be a dark shadow, with sun seldom reaching the bottom except for a few hours around noon. And so at times it can appear quite dark. And the shepherd knows from past experience that predators like coyotes, bears, wolves, and cougars can take cover in these broken cliffs and from their vantage point prey on the flock. He knows these valleys can be subject to sudden storms and flash floods that send water rampaging down the slopes. There can be rock slides, mud or snow avalanches, and a dozen other natural disasters that would destroy or injure the sheep. Woo! How many want to come to the valley? But the shepherd knows. In spite of such hazards, he knows that this is still the best way to take his flock to the high country. Just because it is difficult doesn't mean it gets closed or canceled or postponed, which so often happens in our world. We cancel so much because it's difficult. Misplaced fear closes us to so many things, when trust in the Good Shepherd is what is required. Don't cancel because it looks hard and seems dangerous. Don't slam the door unless he slams it for you. He wants us to walk forward because he is going to protect you. He's going to protect you in the way that you may not understand what protection looks like according to him. Doesn't mean he makes it easy, but he's doing things in you that are important. He spares himself no pains or trouble or time to keep an eye out for any danger that might develop, but we all keep going together. And as I walk with Jesus, my confidence and trust grows. And that's what I've learned as I walk through the valleys. It's in this spiritual as well as emotional, mental exposure to the storms and adversities of life that puts stamina into my very being. Because he has led me through without fear before, he can do it again, and he can do it again and again. And like I shared earlier, it gets easier. As I recognize his voice and know his presence, fear begins to fade. And my heart learns to rest, not panic. It learns to rest, and my mind learns to go to a place of peace because he says, I am with you. So let come what may, storms may break around me, predators may attack, the rivers may overflow and threaten to drown me, but because he is in the situation, I will not fear. And Paul tells us, and I love this from 2 Corinthians 4, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And like Paul went through beatings and prison and like torture, and he calls them our light and momentary troubles because we have something so much more to look forward to. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. On this journey, we need to remember things are not always as they appear. We will walk through a variety of valleys in this life, and there will be a lot of shadows, but they need not be disasters or things to fear. Our disappointments, our frustrations, our discouragements, our dilemmas, the dark and the difficult days, we walk through them. We don't live in them. We're not defined by them, but we're meant to go through them. We're not meant to stay in those places, and they can be a road to higher ground in our walk with God. So to live as followers of Jesus is to have taken some very long treks towards the high country of holy, calm, and healthy living with God. We are on a journey. So how does your heart feel knowing that the valleys are part of the journey? We're not to resist them. We're not to go, well, we really can't go around them. We try really hard. But he, the shepherd, is going to lead us through them. And through that, we're going to be watered and nourished and restored and brought to these beautiful tablelands where life is at. But he's going to do it, and he draws so much closer to us in the valley. How many find comfort hearing that in the valley, he is so close? He is closer than anywhere else in the valley. That's where he's so close. And I believe that God is in a process in the season that we're in of cleansing and bringing refreshment, and he wants to wash off the grime of some of the things that we have walked through over the last 3 to 5 years. We've walked through some really difficult things in the pandemic. We live in a world where fear is swirling everywhere. Fear is a really powerful motivator. It's also a liar. And so I believe in the season that God wants to wash off, and he wants to cleanse us from those things that have kept us seated and not moving into the things that God has for each one of us. He has wonderful things for you. He has things he wants to do in you and through you. And he wants to wash off the grime and the fear that has kept you from stepping into those things. And so, Heather, do you want to come on up? And also part of washing off that grime is there are things that we've allowed in our lives that you can no longer accept. There's things that you've been okay with that you know that he's been talking to you about that you need to let go of. There are ways that you're living and things that you're carrying that you can't carry anymore. And some of you know exactly what those things are. And he wants to help you let go of those things. And he especially wants to meet you in the fear and the timidity that has been forced upon us like a cruel taskmaster, and to see you walk in trust and in closeness with him. He wants to cleanse you of those things. And so this morning, I'm just going to have Heather, the song where you sang, "I will not fear, for he's with me in the valley." I just feel like that was so powerful when we were singing that this morning. And I just really sense that God wants to cleanse and just wash the fear off of us and remind us that there's no other antidote to fear than him. Because fear is still going to try to come at you. It's still going to raise its claws and make it appear bigger than it really is. That spider on the wall, when it's a shadow, can look so much bigger. But I just really sense that he wants to free us from that, to cleanse us from that, to refresh us from those fears this morning. And he wants to open your eyes to see him and not the shadow. He wants to open your ears to hear his voice and not the voice of the liar and the deceiver, and from people that don't know what he has for you. He wants to cleanse you of those things. We don't fear the shadows. We hang on to the shepherd. And so let's just change position this morning. Let's have you stand. And I'm just going to get Heather just to lead us through. I just feel like as a collective body to sing out that I will not fear because he is with me. And then we're just going to see where the Lord leads from there.